To this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster Tarpley, reporting from a rather sunny Washington, D.C., bracingly cold, but sunny, and it's now the afternoon of Friday, March 16th, 2018, and here we are on the banks of the Potomac, coming with our weekly roundup and analysis. Stay tuned today. You're going to get the key to understanding just about everything that Trump is doing at this point. It's not a mystery. We can make sense of it. But first of all, we have to look at the calendar. This is our St. Patrick's program. This is when we send our congratulations to our Irish American and other friends around the world, right? The country that was in many ways treated in at least in Western Europe, we might say, they got the worst treatment of anybody from the British, and above all from the butcher Cromwell, who started a lot of this stuff back in the mid-1600s. And we want to remember one of our favorite heroes is Theobald Wolfe Tone, who was the leader of the movement for straight-out Irish independence at the time of Napoleon. And it was, of course, a tragedy that this did not occur. It's a tragedy for the British, too, because they did try for many years to break the will of the Irish people to have some independence and some dignity, and instead they were kept under this really unparalleled yoke. Again, you have to go thousands of miles to the east to find any example of oppression and suppression so serious as what was done then to the Irish. So, St. Patrick's Day, no orange tomorrow, no red for England, no, orange, no, but the green, the wearing of the green. They're hanging men and women for the wearing of the green. That was the story back in the 19th century. The other thing we want to mark is we've just gone through on Thursday the Ides of March. Yes. The soothsayer told Julius Caesar to watch out for the Ides of March. I wonder if anybody told Trump. Now, it's all over with. Thank goodness there has been no violence. This is never our intent. But rather, two unkindest cuts. These were the unkindest cuts of all. The first, a subpoena. A grand jury subpoena sent by the Bob Mueller team to the Trump Organization, telling them, first of all, preserve all your records. You're not allowed to shred, destroy, delete anything. No circular file. You got to keep it all. That's one of the things that a subpoena does. And then get ready to fork over the following types of documents, the following key words. This, of course, is a big step. We have to assume that Mueller has long since violated, if we can say this, that he has not felt bound by the absurd and illegal red line posed by Trump a year ago or so, that the business side of the dotard was untouchable and you weren't allowed to look, right? As even Bannon said, oh, gang, let's have fun. Let's tell the federal prosecutor what he's not allowed to look at. Yeah, a hopeless enterprise, and rightly so. If you want the law, which in this case we really need. So the subpoena has gone to the Trump Organization. They've gotten it. If they tamper with those documents now, that's going to be a federal offense. And Trump, we don't know now. Trump, there was this event a couple of weeks ago where he put out one cri de coeur, right? One primal scream on the Twitter bank there, which was simply all caps, very large typeface, witch hunt, exclamation point. Or it may be several months earlier when we had that other unique, characteristic Trump Twitter, which was, do something! Exclamation point with some of the text above it. These are the moments when the alarm bells begin to go off. So the Mueller subpoena is a giant step. Now, the walls, as we've said, the walls are continuing to come in on this strange enterprise in the White House. So the subpoena from Mueller, that's the first of the unkindest cuts. The second one, and this is actually interesting, that really, in some ways for the first time, the Trump regime has been forced to undertake, at least in symbolic terms, maybe not in substantive hardware on the ground terms, but substantive we don't know, but symbolically, yes. That is to say, a joint statement by the United Kingdom, the French Republic, the Federal Republic of Germany, and the United States condemning the actions of Russia in this poisoning of the former, and I guess we have it now, this was a GRU, a military intelligence colonel, Skripal, who is fighting for his life, and as is his daughter, 33-year-old woman, after they were doused in some way by this Novichok, this very powerful nerve agent. Right? According to some, it's estimated to be 10 times, 8 times the power of the normal VX or other kinds of nerve agents, nerve gas, things like this. The less powerful ones were allegedly the ones used by North Korea, right? The DPRK, when Kim wanted to kill his embarrassing half-brother at that airport, and you've seen the film, they throw some of this VX in his face, and he died rather quickly. In this case, with Skripal, I don't know what his chances are, and nor do we know what the daughter's chances are. But this is obviously not acceptable. You can't have people getting assassinated, right? I know the stories of some Italian anti-fascists that were assassinated in New York City, say during the 1930s, and these were big diplomatic incidents. In other words, they could have been bigger, but the U.S. government was probably not ready to respond. But in this case, it's a very definite affront. Let's just go through what this is. Now, the point about this is an unkind cut because this unusual and actually troubled, but at least existing united effort by Britain, Germany, France, U.S. has forced Trump to come out of his hole, come out from under his rock, and stop mouthing these evasive formulas of appeasement that he's been relying all the way. So we'll tell you about this in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's the 16th of March, 2018. Yesterday, the Ides of March, 2 of the unkindest cuts of all. 1, the Mueller subpoena to the Trump Organization. Preserve your records and fork over the following key words. Very interesting. Trump's red line openly defied. And, he's a great expert in red lines, right? Telling us all about how bad and how craven and how cowardly Obama was. Well, we'll see how much bravery Trump can muster, right? What do they call him? Cadet Bone Spurs. There he is. He would have run into the building, sure. Pot valiant, I think, would be one word. Vainglorious, that's for sure. So, the other unkind cut was this joint statement by Britain, the United States, Germany, and France, who, have released this joint statement. Now, this is a reason why you need to get the daily service here. Go to www.americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and that is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, around 9 o'clock in the evening, the commentary of the day. I think we did a fairly good job on the Pennsylvania 18 election, and we have been ahead of the most of the press by pointing out the imminent departure of McMaster, which we went into at the beginning of the month. Pardon me. I guess the pollen season is beginning here, because it is quite spring-like now. And, of course, we are at the end of winter, right? 5 more days of winter at the most until we get to the equinox. So Trump likes to cower behind these gibberish formulas. He speaks in riddles. The 400-pound guy on his mother's mattress down in the basement could have been anybody, could have been China or whoever else, on and on and on. Complete cowardice, right? Everybody can see it. So he doesn't like to come out of that because it's obvious there is compromat, right? There are materials apparently in the hands of the let's call it the Putin forces, who which could be embarrassing for Trump. Maybe they're so graphic that they would go beyond, right? As we know, sometimes photographs are the ones that pictures are worth 1,000 words. So Trump, because of the British, French, German cooperation on this, you can see that Trump was forced, whatever else he did, to join in on this. And this might have been one of the reasons for the firing of Tillerson, was that Tillerson would have been the guy, and or McMaster, right, to tell him, Trump, you've got to sign this. You've got to join in on this. And he'd say, no, I don't want to, because I love Putin. No, you got to do it, or you're really in trouble. You're really going to be discredited. Everybody's going to see you for what you are. So here we have this statement, a rare united comment. I'm going from the London Guardian article here. It's signed by Theresa May, Donald Trump, Angela Merkel, who is now in full power as Chancellor once again of Germany. This is not a caretaker government, minority government. This is a full grand coalition with full power to do things. And the president of France, Emmanuel Macron. It was released from number 10 Downing Street. Now, I actually tried to find this at the State Department and at the White House, and I didn't find it. So I think that's a little bit shameful, but you can go to the Downing Street one, right? Prime Minister of Great Britain. So this is the British seeking support, and they've got it. Trump was asked, just as this was coming out, was Russia behind the attack? It looks like it. I've spoken with the Prime Minister, and we are in discussions. A very sad situation. It certainly looks like the Russians were behind it. Something that should never, ever happen, and we're taking it very seriously, as I think are many others. Now, some people might say, well, this is still pathetic, right? This is still cringing cowardice, right? This is somebody who wants to skedaddle, right? Franklin D. Roosevelt says, I don't care about Pearl Harbor. Hirohito likes me. Kennedy says, what? Missiles in Cuba? And on and on. So the statement, let's just go through some of the statement. We'll see what Trump has been forced to sign on to by international opinion. The use of Novichok once again being that very extreme form of nerve gas, nerve agent, constitutes the first offensive use of a nerve agent in Europe since the Second World War. Now, the NATO center there in Brussels, right? This would be Jens Stoltenberg, has also said, they put out a NATO statement, I think approved by the ambassadors that are there, saying this is the first nerve gas attack on the territory of NATO states since 1949. So that sort of lines up. The four leaders declared that their abhorrence for the attack that took place against Sergei and Yulia Skripal. So this once again is GRU Colonel, retired, Sergei Skripal. Quote, a British police officer who was also exposed in the attack remains seriously ill, and the lives of many innocent British civilians have been threatened. We express our sympathies to them all and our admiration for the UK police and emergency services for their courageous response. It was an assault on UK sovereignty, and any such use by a state party of this Novichok is a clear violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, which Russia has signed, and a breach of international law. This assault threatens the security of us all. The United Kingdom thoroughly briefed its allies that it was highly likely that Russia was responsible for the attack. We share the British assessment that there is no plausible alternative explanation, and we note that Russia's failure to address the legitimate request by the British government further underlines its responsibility. Now that's it's not everything one want, but it takes a clear stand. We'll be back in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, that's what Trump was forced to sign, right? Kicking and screaming, and indeed firing the Secretary of State in the process, and signaling that the National Security Advisor will soon be ejected from the White House. But nevertheless, it went through. Trump has never said anything categorical, anything lapidary, right? Anything clear about the Russian role. He can't do it. They've got something on him. He's blackmailable. He's compromised. He shouldn't have a security clearance. You got all that going. Now, the thing about the Russian reaction, I've sampled this. I've looked at the sort of the diplomatic statements. You look at RT. RT is snide. They're sarcastic. They use innuendo, but they don't deny it. These are all non-denial denials. There is no denial. And I think what we got, let me just trace the mentality of Putin here. The most recent statements by Putin say, I think literally, so what? So what? Actually, this probably is the one that goes back to the Megyn Kelly Putin interview that was put on NBC on, I believe, Friday evening. And so this is, the motives of Madame Megyn Kelly. We can leave that aside. We don't care. Like, she went from Fox, NBC. So there she is with Putin, right? He accepted the interview. And she says, now we have addresses. We have names, addresses, and homes, the kind of thing that the KGB always says you need to have. So he laughs. Putin then denies that the Russian government approved of the attack. You have no idea? And he says, look, the world is very diverse. There are people in our country that may have done it, but it's not the government. Now, you remember what this is. This is the patriotic hackers argument that Putin deployed in St. Petersburg last summer, right? Summer, I mean, we have these rambunctious patriotic hackers who we can't control. And it's not us. It's not the state. It's not the government. Now, this is, of course, ridiculous, because what is the Russian government? It's a three-headed, it's a troika, yes, it's a three-headed hydra. It's got the Russian state with Putin. It's mainly the so-called Siloviki, the power ministers, right? The KGB, the intelligence, the border troops, the internal security, right? The people who can put you in jail or, put an end to you. Then Putin, in his capacity as top oligarch, leads an oligarchy. That's the second prong. And then you've got oligarchs who merge over into organized crime, right? People like Mogilevich and others, right? The mafia with a Y-A at the end. And that's the state. So the idea that there's now this clear dividing line between state activity and non-state activity, that really no longer holds up. Take a look at that Wagner group, right? The group, this is mercenaries, right? Blackwater. Did you like Blackwater? Did you support Blackwater? Hey, alt-left out there. Were you just so happy with Blackwater? Well, now the Russians have imitated Blackwater, and I'm sure, they've been at this for quite a long time. Does that mean that now it's good? Because the Russians are doing it. The U.S., of course, axiomatically bad for the alt-right, right? This is, and the alt-left. The alt-left I'm trying to talk about now. They can't stand the U.S. no matter what happens. But how about if the Russians do the same thing? So the Russians, again, the Wagner contractors apparently trying to seize this oil field so they could get 20% of the take, and then the U.S. blows them away, and the Russian commanders won't own it, right? They say, oh no, we have plausible denial. We're not gonna take part in that. So anyway, Putin is now on the line of the patriotic hackers that the Russian state can't control. Here's what he says. The world is diverse. Our people may do things, but of course the French, the British, and others may also do it. Could be that they were Russians, says Putin, but not the government. Were they Russians? Were they Ukrainians? Were they Tatars? Were they Jews? Now this is very interesting because it shows the way he thinks. He says you can have Russians or you can have Ukrainians, Tatars, and Jews with Russian passports, Russian citizenship. Wait a minute. What does that mean? That if you're a Tatar in Russia, a citizen of Russia, of the Russian Federation, that you're something different from a Russian? In other words, somebody who's culturally a great Russian or something like this? Look at the way he thinks. Who else thinks like that? You know who thinks like that? Trump thinks like that. That you can be Judge Curiel and you're a Mexican. And the guy was born in Indiana, but nevertheless he's a Mexican. This is the wrong way to think. This is anti-American. This is the antithesis of a very powerful principle. You don't want to give up on this principle because this is one of the greatest strengths in the world, that the country is an idea. You endorse the idea, work for the idea, and you are as much a part of that country as anybody, even the first families of Virginia or the Mayflower Pilgrims or anything of the sort. Now, here's the other thing. if she says, Megyn Kelly says, what if it's the 13 in the indictment and the 3 entities? And this includes this guy, Prigozhin. And Putin says, I don't care. I could not care less. This is the so what. We never extradite anybody. What they've done is not illegal. They're aware that the U.S. has been interfering in Russia. The U.S. interferes in Russia, he says, but Russia does not interfere in the U.S. It's against our principles. We don't do cyber. RT is all we have. And then Prigozhin, right? Prigozhin is the character who's one of the 13 indicted, one of the top ones, oligarch, Putin's chef, Putin's caterer, but he's also seemingly the guy who controls this Wagner private military firm, right? Contractors. And Prigozhin says, don't call him a friend. He's not my friend. He's not a government official. He's not a government employee. Maybe he just does your dirty work. No, I don't do dirty work. The problem with this is Prigozhin is a government contractor. In other words, he's somebody who works with and for the Red Army and other branches of the Russian military establishment. And then he says, we have mercenaries in Syria who are interested in fuel and energy, but we don't support Prigozhin's activities in this field. You can't have private person. These are volunteers. Hey, this is what the Chinese communists said about the army they sent to Korea in 1950. Right? Those are volunteers. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. When you add up these quotes, right, I don't care, so what, you factor in the sarcasm of Lavrov. I'm really sorry to see this. I'm sorry to see it with Putin, but they're doing it, and therefore they've made their choice, and this is unacceptable. We have to respond to real facts, not your opinion of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, during the Berlin crisis. No. Now, today, this is reality. And these people are, they're deteriorating rapidly. What I see here is nihilism. We've talked about nihilism, right? Nihilism discussed by Turgenev, Fathers and Sons, talked about by Chekhov in The Cherry Orchard. This current, right? The place where nihilism became a significant phenomenon, right? When all of the the things worthy of being believed in, be it the monarchy or the religion or whatever else it was, you're left with nihilism. And nihilism seems to be the philosophy that dictates that it's perfectly okay for you to try to tear down not even rival powers, but in some ways civilization itself. It's very stupid. Stalin, Bukharin, and the other leaders, Zinoviev, right? He didn't quite live long enough, but he did what he could. They were the people who said, tell the German Communist Party, KPD, which was a mass party, tell them that the main enemy is not Hitler, said the Russian propaganda. Tell them, rather, said the Russian propaganda, that the social democrats, the social fascists, are the main enemy. And that's what they did, and the result then was that instead of having the social democrats and the communists cooperating to sweep the Nazis off the streets, the Nazis took power. And didn't the Soviet Union pay a terrible price for this scheming, harebrained scheming? Well, I'm afraid Putin is now seeing the harvest of his harebrained scheming, this idea that you're going to interfere with the U.S. Right? This tends to bring some pretty horrendous neocons into power, under the aegis of Trump, though. And that's what we're seeing. So there we are, and therefore Putin should stop it, right? Our program for Putin would be, first of all, issue an apology for meddling in the United States. This includes the attempt to install what amounts to a fascist regime in this country. Take down, break up, destroy the Internet Research Agency and the rest of the apparatus that does this. Punish those responsible with public trials. Put on show trials. Let's have this Prigozhin on trial for meddling in the U.S. and promoting the coming of this monstrous reactionary regime. And after that, you could then discuss other things. But unfortunately, unless and until this happens, you can't trust them. And it also includes now this dimension of Russian reconnaissance to check the cyber defenses of power plants, power grids, refineries, and other sensitive installations. This now, once again, is taking on a certain relevance, right? Obviously needs to be looked at carefully, but above all, what needs to be done is to build up the defenses, right? To harden these sites. So there we are. Look, Boris Johnson gets a chance to look good. Here, let's talk for a second now about the complication here is that the British want you to support them. And because of the emergency, we do. But this Brexit, this insanity must stop. Dump Brexit. And don't let the British forget that they want solidarity now. They've been denying everybody else their solidarity, right? So here we go. Here we have the Washington Post of Thursday, March 15th. The attack, this is the attempt to kill Skripal. The attack comes at a delicate moment for members of the Western Security Alliance that usually have little trouble presenting a united front against Russia. EU leaders plan to discuss this issue at a previously scheduled summit next week, but Britain's divorce in process from the bloc limits the European appetite to make sacrifices for London. This is Brexit. The British are stabbing you in the back, right? Perfide Albion, as usual, stabbing you in the back with this piece of lunacy. And now they want you to, put up sanctions or something that are undoubtedly going to be designed so the British pay less and you pay more. Europe, and the other dimension, of course, is Trump. This other crazy man. Europe is also fighting with Washington about Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum, a dispute that could impede any transatlantic response to the poisoning. Now, this was the context for the president of the European Council, Donald Tusk of Poland, right? And he says, at a time of fake news spreading, meddling in our elections, attacks on people on our soil with nerve agents, the response must be not transatlantic bickering, but transatlantic unity. Whatever you think of this guy, this is sensible. This is golden wisdom, in fact. So he says he offers May full solidarity. But, writes the Washington Post, a European diplomat said it would be ironic for May to seek EU sanctions after Brexit voters. Now let's not get it. Brexit voters, no. This was, a brainwashed public with lots and lots of Russian input. This was meddling. This was the Internet Research Agency. This was active measures, the Gerasimov doctrine, hybrid warfare. That's who voted. That's who wanted Brexit. And oligarchs, right? Domestic oligarchs of the depraved variety. So how ironic that May wants EU sanctions against Russia after the British put themselves on this path to reject the support and the unity of the European Union. Right? The European Union is precisely an answer to the fact that a country of 60 million is too small. It cannot compete. It can't defend itself. And the British say, well, we keep NATO, but we get rid of the European Union. I don't know if that's going to work. Right? Are you in it or are you out of it? So the diplomat who spoke to the Washington Post said, although many European leaders are appalled by the nerve agent attack, the unity required to apply sanctions against Russia probably would not be available. So the West is paralyzed by the stupidity and criminality of this Brexit. Roll this back. If May wants to preserve her country, she should now formally repudiate Brexit. Unlikely. She should then resign. Another election, right? And this crazy majority she has with this anti-Irish. Today of all days, St. Patrick's Day, the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland. I'm sorry, that is not the basis, right? These are all fragmented coalitions. So there we have it. And as these crises go on, Trump's political position of appeasing Moscow is going to be more and more untenable. And this is one of the things that's going to doom the Republican Party, who have now become the Federalists, like the party of the foreigner, the party of Jews. Back in a minute on Full. To the second hour now of World Crisis Radio for March 16th, 2018. We're in the aftermath of the devastating Ides of March. Mueller subpoenas Trump Organization records. They can't shred them now. It's a federal offense. And then Trump forced, in spite of himself, right, kicking and screaming, to sign the joint British, French, German statement. And again, that's significant parts of the world, right? The places that, centers certainly of civilization whose statements in this kind of a context deserve, I think, serious effort, right? Not the sarcasm and the who cares or I don't care, or so what, coming from the top of the Russian government. And also the similarly snide nonsense coming from the alt-left, right? The alt-left. The alt-right, we know, they're hopeless. The alt-left, they should be ashamed of themselves, right? With the kind of things they're doing, right? Die Vaterlandslosen Gesellen, as they were called, right? These people who really don't have a country, right? The men without a country, that's what they are, right? And when the going gets rough, you've really got to think about where you are, right? Where do you stand? When the facile quips and sarcasms of many decades in some ways go out the window, right? It's a lot of people in Western Europe had to figure this out for themselves. 1939, 1940 especially. Where do you stand anyway? What do you stand for, if anything? And it's no good saying, oh yeah, but these people on the one side are all guilty of crimes. Well, the people, for example, the British government well into 1940 was Sir Neville Chamberlain. So you could look at him and say, well, I can't support Britain because they're appeasers. Look at this guy. He's an appeaser. He made Hitler great. Yes, but if they change, you have to. It's very much of a tactical situation, hour by hour. Otherwise, you're caught in 1942 saying, well, the British government are all appeasers, so I wash my hands and I don't care. And that makes you a useful idiot for the other side then and now. Now, of course, there's a lot of clowning going on. Boris Johnson, by God, the Brexiteer, The blonde pretty boy is in the Washington Post and similar places with op-eds and what have you. And we're not impressed. The other one is the British tabloids. Always funny. The British tabloids have, for example, it's time to rip the World Cup of soccer out of Putin's hands. Because as you see, one of the ferocious, blood-curdling measures that the British government says is that no member of the British royal family will go to the World Soccer Championships in Moscow. Now, of course, these tabloids, right, the London tabloids, they seem to be saying no British team should go, especially England, right? Because that's where this happened, right? This was Salisbury, right? Salisbury. For those of you who know your Dickens, you got to remember the novel that's most associated with Salisbury is, of course, Martin Chuzzlewit, because Salisbury is the abode of Mr. Pecksniff, the hypocrite. But that's all just background. So rip the World Cup out of his hands. The Daily Mail had, we don't want to go to your soccer tourney. Look, this is not serious. The serious options include things like limiting or blocking Russian access to the SWIFT system. If you want to do business in the Western world, right, your interbank transfers, you could think about other things, and those would be more serious, right? You could think about pumping more oil, getting Saudi Arabia, if they would do it, to pump more oil. And there are a couple of other things that could be carried out. But you get it. These are all economic. They're not. They're not violent. Right? This is not military. This doesn't start it. So SWIFT, oil production, various kinds of cyber defenses, but also eventually cyber counterattacks. There is this entire oligarch community, the Russian emigre oligarchs, but also Russian oligarchs who are part of the regime, do things, right? It's vaguely hinted at in what the British have been saying, that they may decide that corrupt, dirty Russian money will not be launderable through London real estate as it has been. Now, of course, whether they'll do this or not is anybody's guess. The United States has now declared sanctions against 19 persons and entities from Russia. There's a statement by Mnuchin, which is, it's okay. It's obviously vainglorious compared to the minute pinprick stuff that's going on, right? This is not Trump being tough with Russia. This is ridiculous. This is below the level even of a very meek, passive defense. Stoltenberg of NATO says that this kind of behavior by Russia could trigger things that are worse. There's also a paper trail going back to 2010. There's a speech by Putin from 2010 where he says, turncoats have got to be liquidated and we won't tolerate that, and so forth. Now, let's look at the strategy. I promised you this at the beginning. Of course, this is a huge international crisis that we're seeing, so we can't forget about it. We are looking at this transition to the wild man regime, right? We've been talking about this for the best part of a week, that Trump has decided to jettison all the standard people, the normal people, and even normal Republican. The normal Republican by now is already a reactionary, a warmonger, a union buster. They're all those things. But somehow it's sort of a cultural difference, because that's the strategy, that the normal Republican hack, the standard Republican candidate, right? Not even candidate, but somebody like this McEntee or Rob Porter, these characters are going to be on their way out. And you're going to get freaks coming back in, madmen, wild men, like maybe Bannon, right? I'm looking for Bannon to make a return to the White House because they're going now into this November election mode. It is a survival mode. And let's get right to the point. If Trump, in the middle of this crisis, ventilates a threat to the Republic of Korea, South Korea, Seoul, if he says, if you don't give me what I want on trade, I'm going to pull U.S. troops out of South Korea, this would be an invitation to an invasion and then to World War III. And it would be the U.S. having to fight their way back in or doing something to stop the North Koreans. Crazy, crazy stuff. But what is it? What is this? This is the new political thinking, the new political thinking of Trump. And it goes like this. We'll give it to you in the next segment. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Back to World Crisis Radio. So what is the formula? It is a regime which is now going to maximize barbarism, savagery, attacks on the vital interest of the U.S. population, but done with this cultural, demagogic, populist appeal to the 33%. In other words, the Fifth Avenue fanatics, the ones who would not object if Trump were to slay somebody in the street, right, wipe them out, and the similar, this other group of desperate hangers-on, right, desperados, rent seekers who want some returns from this, right? So the hope is to keep that at about 30, 32, 35%. This is the base. But the argument about the base now looks different. After Pennsylvania 18, which we'll say a few things about, we did go through this in quite a bit of detail in a Wednesday program. I'd go and subscribe to the American System, and in the Wednesday program, I think we did a pretty decent overview of what had gone on here. The idea that Trump obviously has now is the House of Representatives is lost. It's a lost cause. It's a dead duck, given these things that have happened with the Alabama Senate, now with the Pennsylvania 18. The House, you can forget. The wave, the blue wave is real. The House is lost. That means that if Trump continues on this path, it's going to be impeachment looming. Likely, possible. Well, we have Al Green and we have Tom Steyer. We have people, Maxine Waters. They're all for it. Pelosi, of course, temporizes. Pelosi, it's hard to see how Pelosi stays on as the Speaker of the House in the next Congress. I don't see it because she's just out of touch, right? It's nice to have a fundraiser, but she can be a fundraiser without being the Speaker of the House. So what's Trump's plan? He's got to more or less pre-discount impeachment. He's going to be impeached. That's what he's got to assume, right? We can't be sure. But this is now getting more and more likely, and the stuff that he's doing makes it more likely still. So what's it going to be? Well, in the House, it's a 51%, majority. It's it's 418 votes. It's 218 to get you to the majority out of 435. Yes, so 218. So if the Democrats get 218, 219 in the House, Trump can be impeached. But now in the Senate, it's harder. In the Senate, it takes a two-thirds majority. It's going to take 67 votes, a supermajority, two-thirds majority in the Senate to remove him. That is to say, to convict him and remove him. That means that Trump can now contemplate a wild man dictatorship with 34 senators. If he keeps 34 senators, 34 diehards, 34 stooges in his pocket, he can be, at least initially, impervious to impeachment, conviction, and renewal. He can't stop impeachment, but he can block the conviction and removal. Now, how does he propose to do this? By maximizing his extreme reactionary, racist, and cultural populist tendencies to keep the enthusiasm, the loyalty of the base, that is to say, of the 35 or so percent, which seems to be about his true level, and that is to say the Fifth Avenue fanatics and the rent-seekers, hangers-on, and those who still expect some kind of a payoff out of this. This is now, in its own way, a strategy of cynical nihilism. Isn't it interesting that the two nihilists across the globe are joining hands, Putin and Trump? So this is it. What does it mean, for example, you're going to oust Tillerson because he's forcing you, or he's advocating that you do things that imperil your relation with Putin? Out he goes, and in comes Pompeo. And we've gone through Pompeo. Pompeo gets you a number of things. Remember, Pompeo, right? This is Pompey the Great, right? If you've seen various versions of Julius Caesar, right? When the conspirators go after Julius Caesar, he ends up at the feet of the statue of Pompey in the Roman Senate. Remember, this is the first triumvirate. This is division of the Roman world into three parts: Caesar, Crassus, the rich guy in the Far East, and Pompey. And then they fall apart, and Caesar defeats the others. But that's Pompey, Pompeo. So what's with Pompeo? All you have to know about Pompeo is four letters: Koch, the Koch brothers, the Coctopus. His original work, his original company was financed by Koch. He then became an corporate officer of a company controlled by Koch. When he ran for Congress, a lot of his financing came from Koch Orbit entities. So that's the Secretary of State. He is, in his own way, he's much weaker in many ways on the Russia front. Some say he's stronger. I don't think he is, because he's against doing anything, right? Words are words, right? Verba volant, scripta manet, right? Words fly away. They're written in water, written in smoke. They blow away. But if you do something and you put on a sanction or something, then that has a chance to stay. What else do we expect, right? The word now is, first of all, that the White House is this insane asylum, right? It's a snake pit. The White House is a snake pit of corruption, the most toxic work environment in the world at this time. Everybody's afraid of the perp walk. They don't want to be frog marched out of the White House like this McEntee. They are living from tweet to tweet, right? Their blood pressure is rising. The tension is enormous. And Trump is unglued and unhinged. But, of course, that's the antic disposition. The antic disposition of Trump is, in its own way, a strategy. Method is madness. That's what we're looking for here. Back in a minute on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We are looking with very sympathetic interest at events in South Africa. In South Africa, they have succeeded in ousting a failed and corrupt president, apparently, President Zuma. His own party, the famous African National Congress, forced him out. And now, existing charges, some of which had been swept under the rug to propitiate Zuma as a powerful political figure. Those are coming out again. He's going to be put on trial. Isn't that interesting? If South Africa can do it, can't we do it here in the U.S.? Anyway, we extend our congratulations to South Africa for their very courageous fight against this kind of corruption and misrule. Now, the RT line now is that the accusations against Russia are out of the James Bond books, or they're out of Shakespeare, where poison, Romeo and Juliet, or other things, other examples, that poison is big, so it's either James Bond, Shakespeare, or they accuse it's the same as the CIA going after Fidel Castro. Yeah, but wasn't that half a century more ago? Doesn't matter. They just throw it out there, right? Make it all into this toxic brew. So it's expected that Trump will be on a firing spree. And, this is it. This is the notion of the wild men taking over, the extreme cultural populist policies where everything that's done is designed as a provocation to freak out either the Democratic opposition or Canada or Mexico or South Korea or some ally around the world, while the usual mealy-mouthed, cowardly appeasement line against the Kremlin, or towards the Kremlin, is strictly observed. And this can lead to all sorts of terrible things. It can lead to an escalation of the Russian activity, and that can then lead, you have to go back. War by miscalculation, war by flight forward, various things, especially when you have somebody who's so tightly controlled by public opinion, with public opinion, of course, being represented by Fox News and the Fox morning show there. So that's we have a proposed menu of some wag on Twitter. He says if you go to the dinner at the Russian embassy, it's going to be pasta, polonium, sarin spaghetti, and Novi chocolate. The French press sees the return of La Guerre Froide, the Cold War, parfum de guerre. It smells like war. Putin toxique. Yes, I'm afraid so. Toxic. And so forth, right? So, the perfide Albion speaks through the Daily Telegraph saying, new Cold War is a chance for hot opportunities. In other words, how can the British, with their Brexit, also make hay out of this? You can see why people don't want to be swept along in that. So, you have Pompey. Now, we got to do a couple of little profile things. We did all of this in some detail during the week. You really got to go in there. How about this? During the week, we stressed the substance abuse problems that were a matter of public record, New York Times, you name it, back in 1994-95, when Kudlow, conservative commentator, reactionary commentator, irrationalist commentator, he lost everything. He had to go into a 6-month rehab. So, how about this? Let's just limit ourselves to the quotes. These come from Jonathan Chait of New York Magazine, Dana Milbank, Washington Post, Daily Sketch. So, Kudlow, he's going to be the head of the National Economic Council. So where was he in the run-up to the last devastating crisis, the one that almost triggered a world depression, which was somehow avoided by Obama, but done in a very unsatisfactory way, which has essentially not solved problems, but has tended to perpetuate them, right? The stagnation that we're living through right now. So what did he write? Kudlow by this time he was back. He was under control. He claims December 7th, 2007, writing for the Buckleyite National Review. And remember, this is now the big panic crash is going to come in September. But even before that, right around this time of year, right, 10 years ago, the blow up of Bear Stearns, which Kudlow had worked for. Right, this is the swamp. Quote. Despite all the doom and gloom from the economic pessimistas, the resilient U.S. economy continues moving ahead, wrote Kudlow. Then he says, forecasters will wind up with egg on their faces. Yes, he wrote. These are bubbleheads. The housing industry is very positive. The news in housing should cushion falling home sales and prices. And now listen to this. This is, again, it's about 9 months before the bottom fell out. There's no recession coming, says Kudlow. The pessimistas were wrong. It's not going to happen. The Bush boom is alive and well. It is finishing up its 6th consecutive year with more to come. Yes, it's still the greatest story ever told. And Milbank writes, if there were a great story, the story now is that Trump has put the economic fate of the country in the hands of a man who has been more publicly and consistently wrong about the economy than any person alive. Gives a nod to Chait. If you had taken Kudlow's advice in the month before 2008, you would have been wiped out, ruined, a pauper, bankrupt, homeless. Okay? So here we are now in February 5th, 2008. This is just, about a month before the bankruptcy of Bear Stearns. He says, I'm still betting on and buying a Goldilocks scenario for the long run, right? Not too hot, not too cold, but just right. Are we going to have a mild correction? Maybe not. I'm willing to bet that the economy will be rebounding sometime this summer, if not sooner. We're in a slow patch, that's all. It's nothing to get up in arms about. This, of course, by the end of the summer, of course, it's in the first days of autumn, maybe. But the end of summer, the crisis of Lehman Brothers is going on. July 24th, 2008. He says, I see in the data an awful lot of very good news, which appears to be pointing to a bottom in the housing problem. It may be the tiniest beginnings of a recovery. So you get the idea. It's crazy. And, of course, the key for Kudlow is tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. We reviewed during the week his record with Laffer, right, the father of this supply side obscurantism. And, of course, he worked for Bear Stearns. He partnered on television with Kramer. Kramer was telling you, don't sell Bear Stearns. Back to World Crisis Radio, right? We went through Kudlow here. How about Gina Haspel and the black sites? Now, we, like many others, relied on an account by ProPublica, which is published everywhere around the world and here. The question is, was Gina Haspel the commandant of this black site camp in Thailand at the time that Abu Zubaydah went in there? And the story then becomes how he was sharing information. He had named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed for whatever that's worth. But was she the commandant who then put the waterboarding, the torture on Abu Zubaydah, which shut him up? And, of course, it backfired. So the story from ProPublica, they published a correction, which we then share in, that says Gina Haspel was not yet the commandant of the black site in Thailand, one of them, at the time Abu Zubaydah went through there. But, of course, it means that later Gina Haspel did become the commandant and did carry out renditions, did carry out enhanced interrogation, i.e. torture, And if you do it to them, it's enhanced interrogation. If they do it to you, it's torture. So that means it is torture. And this kind of stuff. So this is obviously unacceptable. Right? This is out of this world. And it's exactly the fact that all decent people are going to get outraged by this and speak up, right? For Trump, he's riding the backlash about that, right? Anybody with a brain in economics is going to be horrified by Kudlow and try to at least prevent him from getting a White House security clearance, because he's obviously he's been an addict of the substances, right? More than one. We discussed in the I guess it was the Thursday show during the week. Now, Haspel, of course, similar. And this is already beginning, right? Hannity and so forth. Bolton, if McMaster is forced out, we may get this John Bolton. Well, what's with him? Well, that's at least 3 wars that you don't want to have. Bolton wants to attack North Korea, bomb them. He wants to attack Iran, bomb them. That's a rather big order. And Cuba. So this person is a deranged warmonger who should not be in any government position. Unfortunately, the Haspel appointment has to go through the Senate. Thank God for that. She can take a real beating. But again, that simply serves Trump. And if she's rejected, that also serves Trump. Although, of course, the Republican stooges, the 34, the regime of the 34, Trump and the 34% solution in the Senate. The idea is you can have a real dictatorship based on 34% of the Senate. So it means it's great to win the House, and you have to. It's indispensable. But you've also got to make a huge effort. And we're told that the Democratic situation in the Senate may not be as good. We'll have to see, right? Maybe the coalitions will shift. And then Bolton, right? So Haspel, Kudlow, Bolton is now pretty much baked in the cake as far as we can see. This is a toxic cake. You don't want to see that. Now, Pennsylvania 18. The main thing here, as I said, we went through this a lot on Wednesday, but the big thing is that the Republicans not only lost this seat by all appearances, right? According to everything that we can see, the big issue here is the Republicans had expected to be able to use their tax cut as the leading edge of their campaign, right? Their big issue. It doesn't work. They don't get traction. I think they were still buying ads in February, but by the time it got to March, they stopped buying tax cut ads. So the tax cut will not work. And now they're shocked because the American people have seen through it. They've seen through the scam. They can see that the lion's share goes to the super rich, to the Kochas, and so forth, and that they're getting the crumbs. Yes, it was correct. The crumbs. And that it's an insult, right? So, therefore, the Republicans, they can't use the tariff in this case because the Democrat was also in favor of the tariff. And there's a whole series of demagogic issues that don't seem to get anywhere. Let me just remind you, after the Iraq War in 1991, Bush the Elder, Mad Dog Bush the Elder, thought he could coast to a second term based on the fact that he was a military victor. Yeah, except it didn't have traction, and the Republicans were shocked to find out that they didn't get anywhere talking about how wonderful it was to defeat Iraq, right? The people said, what about my standard of living? What about my health care? What about my kid going to college and all the rest of it? So the Republicans are in a big crisis. What did they do? Remember, in Virginia, Gillespie, the Republican, was trying to run on a tax cut for Virginia. Didn't work. Now, in this Pennsylvania 18, that didn't work either with the Republican tax cut already done, the tariffs, and the stock market, of course, the stock market bubble. So what did the Republicans fall back on? 3 things. You can see these touted and highlighted in headlines of mine from this week. First of all, racism, crime in the streets from Nixon to now. It's a dog whistle. It means crime by black Americans. But, of course, not only. There's also immigration. Crime can also come from MS-13. It can come from other nefarious rapists, murderers coming pouring across the border. And then, of course, the eternal bugaboo, Nancy Pelosi. Oh, my God, do they think they're going to run on being against Nancy Pelosi? I think that's pathetic. So, once again, the result of that is that the House, by all appearances, is a lost cause. It's hopeless. It's gone. So you may face impeachment, right? More than likely. That depends on whether the Democrats get any backbone, whether they get angry, and also to the extent that activists hold their feet to the fire, which we fully intend to do. And therefore, it's the 34% solution. Out of 100 senators, you've got to keep 34. If you do that, you can even be impeached. And that will even help you, right? Because that will then be seen as overreaching, overzealous, right? And then you can hang on if you can keep the 34 stooges, if you can keep your hardcore of reactionary, rural, racist, xenophobic support in the Senate, because then you avoid conviction and removal. So that's, I think, the big outcome. Now, do we have a couple of seconds left? We've got some very interesting maps. Maybe I won't even get to go through all these, but go to the London Daily Mail and look at the maps that they show you of the diseases of despair, causes of death in the United States. First one, they show you opioid deaths. And this is very interesting. They show up in red. And where's the center of the red? It's Appalachia. It is essentially West Virginia, Kentucky. It reaches a little bit into northern Tennessee. But that's the area. There's another splotch of red out northern New Mexico on the northern border. Then, let's see one more. Just trying to get you to go to these and look at them, because you will be shocked in terms of alcohol-related deaths. This is mainly in the West. Take a look at the area around the Four Corners. Then we have suicides. This is also mainly in the West and in Alaska. And then interpersonal violence. This goes up the Mississippi River. It's big in Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and there's a swath across southern Alabama. These are these diseases of despair. That's why we need 30 million jobs, 10 million for jobs. Go to the demonstration next on Saturday the 24th. Join the kids on the anti-gun march, and we'll see.